Charles Bronson exposed a doctor who was harvesting organs from homeless patients. The truth shocked everyone. The homeless man died on a Tuesday night in January 1982. His name was William Carter, and he was brought to St. Mary's Hospital in downtown Los Angeles after collapsing on the street outside a mission where Charles Bronson regularly volunteered. Charles had been working with the homeless community for several years, donating money and time to various shelters and outreach programs. It was work he did quietly, without publicity, because he believed that real charity didn't need an audience. William was maybe 50 years old, a Vietnam veteran who'd been living on the streets for 3 years after losing his job and his apartment. Charles had talked to him several times at the mission. He was intelligent, well-educated, but struggling with untreated PTSD and alcoholism. When William collapsed, Charles was there. He rode in the ambulance to St. Mary's Hospital and stayed in the waiting room while the emergency room doctors worked on him. Dr. Marcus Webb was the attending physician, a man Charles had met at charity events. Webb had a reputation as a dedicated doctor who often treated homeless patients for free, which was why Charles respected him. "Mr. Bronson, Dr." Webb said, approaching Charles in the waiting room. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Carter didn't make it. His liver was too damaged from years of alcohol abuse. There was nothing we could do." Charles felt a familiar sadness. He'd seen too many veterans end up on the streets, forgotten by the country they'd served. "Can I see him? I'd like to say goodbye." "Of course. He's being prepared for the morgue now. You can visit for a few minutes." But when Charles went to see William's body, something didn't look right. There were fresh surgical incisions on William's torso, covered with hasty stitches. The cuts looked too extensive for simple emergency treatment. "Dr. Webb," Charles asked, "what were these incisions for?" "Emergency surgery. We tried everything we could to save him, but the damage was too extensive." Charles looked at the incisions again. He wasn't a doctor, but he'd been around enough movie sets with medical consultants to know that these cuts looked more like organ extraction than life-saving surgery. These looked like very extensive procedures for someone who died of liver failure. Dr. Webb's expression became guarded. "Mr. Bronson, I understand your concern, but medical procedures can appear more invasive than they actually were. Sometimes we have to explore multiple options when trying to save a patient." Charles left the hospital troubled by what he'd seen. Something about William Carter's death didn't feel right, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly what was bothering him. 2 weeks later, Charles was volunteering at the mission when another homeless man, Robert Martinez, collapsed during dinner service. Charles again rode in the ambulance to St. Mary's Hospital, and again Dr. Webb was the attending physician. Robert died after 2 hours of emergency surgery. And again, when Charles went to pay his respects, he saw extensive surgical incisions that seemed far more invasive than necessary for the reported cause of death. "Dr. Webb, I noticed that both William Carter and Robert Martinez had very similar surgical incisions. Is that normal for the types of medical emergencies you were treating?" "Mr. Bronson, I appreciate your concern for these patients, but I'm not at liberty to discuss specific medical procedures with someone who isn't family. I'm not asking for confidential information. I'm asking why 2 different patients who died of different causes both have identical surgical scars." Dr. Webb looked nervous. "Sometimes emergency procedures require similar approaches. Every case is different, but the surgical techniques can appear similar to non-medical personnel." Charles wasn't satisfied with that explanation. He called Mickey Torino, his private investigator friend. "Mickey, I need you to look into something at St. Mary's Hospital. I think there might be something wrong with how they're treating homeless patients." Charles described what he'd observed with William Carter and Robert Martinez. "Charlie, what you're describing could be legitimate medical treatment, or it could be something much more sinister. Are you sure about what you saw?" "I'm sure those incisions were more extensive than they needed to be for emergency treatment. And I'm sure Dr. Webb was nervous when I asked about them. If you're already getting chills about where this story is heading, make sure you subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. What Charles Bronson discovered next is going to shock you to your core. This is one of the most disturbing cases of medical fraud in Hollywood history, ***. Mickey's investigation took 3 weeks and revealed something that made Charles's blood run cold. Dr. Marcus Webb was running an illegal organ harvesting operation targeting homeless patients who came to St. Mary's Hospital. These were people with no family, no insurance, no one who would ask questions if they died during emergency treatment. Webb would pronounce patients dead or beyond saving, then harvest valuable organs, kidneys, liver, corneas, heart valves, and sell them on the black market to wealthy patients who couldn't wait for legitimate organ donations. "Charlie, this is one of the most horrific things I've ever investigated," Mickey told him during their meeting. "Webb has been systematically murdering homeless people to steal their organs." Charles felt physically sick. "How many victims are we talking about?" "Based on hospital records I was able to access, at least 15 homeless patients have died at St. Mary's in the past year under suspicious circumstances. All of them were treated by Dr. Webb. All of them had extensive surgical procedures before death, and none of them had autopsies because they were classified as indigent deaths with no next of kin. Where are the organs being sold? That's the really sick part. Webb has been selling organs to wealthy patients at exclusive private clinics. People who can afford to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to skip organ donation waiting lists." Charles was quiet for a moment, processing the magnitude of what he was hearing. Dr. Webb wasn't just stealing organs, he was murdering vulnerable people who had trusted him to provide medical care. "Mickey, we need to stop this before he kills anyone else." "Charlie, this is federal crime territory. We're talking about murder, organ trafficking, conspiracy. This needs to go to the FBI immediately. But we need enough evidence to make sure Webb can't destroy records or flee the country when he realizes he's been caught." Charles made one of the most dangerous decisions of his life. Instead of immediately going to authorities, he decided to gather more evidence by going undercover at the hospital. Charles approached the hospital administration and offered to fund a new program providing free medical care to homeless patients. The program would allow Charles to be present during treatment of homeless individuals, ostensibly to ensure the charity money was being used effectively. For the next month, Charles spent several nights a week at St. Mary's Hospital, observing Dr. Webb's treatment of homeless patients. What he documented was a systematic pattern of medical murder. Webb would identify homeless patients who had no family or social connections. He would then perform unnecessary procedures that would weaken them, declare them beyond saving, and harvest their organs while they were still alive but unconscious. Charles secretly recorded conversations where Webb discussed organ sales with buyers. He photographed medical records showing the pattern of suspicious deaths. He documented the storage and transportation of harvested organs. Drop a like on this video if you can't believe what Charles Bronson was willing to risk to expose this monster. The evidence he gathered was about to bring down one of the most evil criminals in medical history, ***. The evidence Charles gathered was overwhelming. Dr. Webb had murdered at least 23 homeless patients over the course of 2 years, selling their organs for over $2 million in illegal profits. But Webb wasn't working alone. The organ trafficking operation involved several other doctors, nurses, and medical technicians at St. Mary's Hospital, plus a network of private clinics that purchased the stolen organs. Charles finally contacted FBI Special Agent Patricia Santos, who specialized in medical fraud cases. "Agent Santos, I have evidence of systematic murder and organ trafficking at St. Mary's Hospital. We're talking about dozens of victims and millions of dollars in illegal organ sales." The evidence Charles provided was so comprehensive that Agent Santos was able to get federal warrants within 48 hours. The FBI raid on St. Mary's Hospital happened on a Wednesday morning in June 1982. Agents arrested Dr. Marcus Webb and 6 other hospital employees who had been part of the organ trafficking ring. They also raided 3 private clinics that had been purchasing the stolen organs, arresting the doctors who had been knowingly implanting organs from murder victims into wealthy patients. Charles was present during the raids, not as a participant but as a witness to ensure that evidence was properly preserved. The most sickening discovery came when agents searched Dr. Webb's home office and found detailed records of every murder he had committed, including photographs of victims and financial records of organ sales. Dr. Webb had been keeping trophies of his crimes, treating the murder of vulnerable people like a business transaction. Mr. Bronson, Agent Santos told Charles after reviewing the evidence, "Without your investigation, Dr. Webb could have continued killing people for years." Homeless victims often don't have advocates, and their deaths rarely get scrutinized closely. Charles felt a mix of satisfaction and rage. Justice was being served, but 23 people had died horrible deaths because a doctor had seen their poverty as an opportunity for profit. Dr. Marcus Webb was eventually convicted on 23 counts of first-degree murder plus conspiracy and organ trafficking charges. He was sentenced to death and executed in 1995. The other members of the organ trafficking ring received sentences ranging from 25 years to life in prison. But for Charles, the most important outcome was systemic change in how hospitals handled indigent patients and suspicious deaths. Let me know in the comments if you think Dr. Webb got what he deserved, and make sure you're subscribed because we have so many more incredible Charles Bronson stories that will blow your mind. The case led to federal legislation requiring autopsies for all suspicious deaths of homeless or indigent patients. It also established oversight committees to monitor treatment of vulnerable populations at hospitals receiving federal funding. Charles used his own money to establish a foundation providing proper medical care to homeless patients, ensuring that people like William Carter and Robert Martinez would never again be seen as disposable sources of spare parts. In 1990, 8 years after the Webb case, Charles testified before Congress about the vulnerability of homeless populations to medical exploitation. "Homeless people aren't just statistics or problems to be solved," Charles told the Congressional Committee. "They're human beings who deserve the same medical care and protection as everyone else. When we allow doctors to see poverty as an opportunity for profit, we've lost our humanity as a society." He paused, looking out at the assembled legislators. Dr. Webb was able to kill 23 people because he knew that nobody cared enough about homeless individuals to ask questions when they died. That has to change. We have to create systems that protect the most vulnerable people in our society, not exploit them. Charles Bronson died in 2003, but the medical oversight systems inspired by the Webb case continue to protect vulnerable patients today. At Charles's funeral, Agent Patricia Santos spoke about a man who risked his life to expose medical murder. Charles Bronson could have walked away after seeing those suspicious surgical incisions, she told the assembled mourners. He could have assumed that medical professionals knew what they were doing and minded his own business. She looked out at the crowd with tears in her eyes. Instead, he spent months gathering evidence that exposed one of the most horrific medical crimes in American history. 23 murder victims got justice because Charles Bronson refused to ignore what he knew was wrong. Today, the Charles Bronson Foundation for Medical Ethics provides oversight and advocacy for vulnerable patient populations. The foundation has prevented numerous cases of medical exploitation and abuse. Above the foundation's offices is a quote from Charles's congressional testimony: "The measure of a society is how it treats its most vulnerable citizens. When we fail to protect them, we fail as human beings." That's the Charles Bronson story that shows his true character. Not the vigilante movies or the tough guy image, but the man who discovered that a trusted doctor was murdering homeless people for their organs and refused to let it continue. Because sometimes evil hides behind the most respectable facades. Sometimes the people we trust most, doctors, teachers, clergy, are the ones capable of the greatest betrayals. Charles Bronson understood that, and 23 murder victims got justice because he was willing to risk everything to expose the truth. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories about Charles Bronson's secret life as a real-world hero. Hit that like button if this story shocked you, and tell me in the comments, what other Charles Bronson story would you like to see next? This channel is dedicated to showing you the amazing true stories behind Hollywood's biggest stars, ***.